Hey guys, welcome back to Hardcore. This is Celestina.
And I'm Miko. Nice to have you back.
I'm stoked for today's episode. So, we've kind of given you guys the foundation, the very basic tip of the iceberg foundation up until this point. But this week we're feeling a little spicy and we're going to do something a little bit different that we're probably also going to be doing in the future because we're super stoked on this episode. Miko and I have bonded over true crime over the past couple of years. And we're bringing that into this space too because we find serial killers and murderers of the like fascinating, and looking at their human design, I think, is just taking it to the next level. So today we are looking at the son of Sam, a semi prolific serial killer in the 1970s in New York. I'm stoked on this. What about you, Miko?
Yeah, me too. I mean, I've always been super fascinated by anyone or anything that is stands out of the norm. So it's not necessarily just serial killers,
That's
although they
fair.
have always intrigued me. But not because of the brutalities of the crime, but more about why people are choosing to do certain things, or
Yeah,
also, yeah, are influential in the world.
I agree. And like, is it biologically ingrained? Is it something that their external factors have like played a role into? And I'm sure it's a combination of both, but it's really cool to be able to have someone's birth time, look at their human design chart, and then also like delve into their history about like, their childhood and then pre them becoming a serial killer and then just kind of dissecting all of that. I'm stoked on today's episode and I'm not even a one line.
Yeah, me too. I'm super excited about it. And what you just mentioned regarding being raised a certain way or having it in your ingrained in your DNA and constantly going back and forth between which one is the catalyst for choosing to go down one or the other path. I studied psychology and criminology when I was a teen and also a tween, and I was always trying to search for these answers, and I could never receive it in this field.
Mm,
So now, having human design, when I looked at his human design chart, I was like, oh my god, he this must be one of the missing puzzle pieces of why he chose to go down that road. And to me, it just makes so much sense. And we're doing this also to show you that there's a duality in human design. There's always a this and that, and you can always go down the shadow path, and you can always choose to go into the light aspect of your design. So the way that someone is going to read your chart is also dependent on who you have the chart read by. So you can always interpret it one way or another, but in the end, it is you who needs to really decipher which side of your human design you're currently on and how you can evolve on that path. So this is why we're also choosing to dive deeper into serial killers, to show you, hey, this is a shadow aspect, but you can turn it into a light aspect.
that's such a good point. Or as you like to phrase it, right? It's like it's the potential of a certain path and unleashing the potential, or staying in the shadow and killing people, apparently. So good. You guys don't have to be that drastic about it when you're looking at your chart. We're just using a very drastic example today. So let's dive into homeboy David Berkowitz. I don't want to give him too much of a pedestal to stand on, but let's talk a little bit about his history. Words.
Yes, well, one of the first things I was fascinated about was that he's still alive and he's sitting in prison. And I don't know, when I see black and white photos, I'm like, oh my god, they must be dead. I mean, and most of these prolific serial killers are, in fact, dead. They often
Yeah.
died when they were quite young, or because of just lethal injection or something like that. And yeah, he's
But
still
New York
alive.
does not New York does not have the death penalty, so homeboy's just rotting in prison. All right. So his life started out in Brooklyn to a mother whose life was real rough and ended up giving him up for adoption. So he was born in Brooklyn, and we're going to dive deeper into the timing of his chart when we get to that section. But he was born in Brooklyn, then he was given up for adoption to a family in the Bronx. So he had an adoptive mother and an adoptive father, and that was when he was pretty young that he was adopted. So it wasn't just like it wasn't a later in life thing, right? Like he grew up with these people as adoptive parents, and he knew he was adopted. And my understanding is that he had two, I'm not going to call them traumatic brain injuries, but he definitely had two instances under 10 years of age that could have contributed to just potential brain issues, if you will. There was a rock thrown at him when he was about 4 years old. It's unclear if it like fell from the sky or if someone physically threw it at him. And I think it was before age of 10 as well that he was in a car accident, and there was definitely residuals of some type of traumatic brain injury from there as well. So this comes back to the external factors potentially playing a role in changing someone's personality or changing their development, right? So those early years weren't super easy. His adoptive mother also stated or mentioned to him that he killed his mother as she was birthing him, like his birth mother, and that was not the case. But from, again, an under 10-year-old age, this kid is very easily influenced at this point, right? Being that age. He was told that he had killed his mother. So that was something that also affected him at this point. And we later find out that he did have a relationship with his birth mother, but he was harboring the fact that he potentially killed his mother at birth, right? And that's a lot for a small child or an adult to handle. And I'm sure that that also like took a toll on him and weighed on him as well.
Yeah, I agree with you on this. I think, first of all, thinking that you killed your birth mother and then having these physical traumas on top of that. During his school years, he was actually also starting to bully people and to set fires and things like this. So you can see that a lot of these aspects have caused in him some challenges, even though he was known to be overly intelligent. So he was more than averagely intelligent. But yeah, he just chose to go another direction, or he was also, I mean, this kind of goes back to me always saying we choose to either be victims or warriors. And at that age, it is on top of that, you're still very much in more survival aspect, and you follow more of the, I want this, I want that, and you don't have the restraints yet.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So as he grew up, obviously this was in the 50s that he was born. So he grew up in the time where we were very much leading into Vietnam in the States. And he enlisted in the army, and instead of being sent to Vietnam, which he really wanted, he wanted to fight for our country in that war, he ended up being sent to Korea, and that was not his cup of tea. He wanted to be more impactful. He was also a marksman in the army, meaning that he was a really good shot. And obviously that's going to come into play a little bit later, right? But in theory, he had good intentions by joining the army, wanting to fight for a cause, and then it just didn't play out how he wanted it to. So he was honorably discharged from the army and was still very much into guns and shooting, and had quite the collection of guns throughout his post-army career as well.
Yeah, and one thing that also happened before he joined the army was that his adoptive mother died from breast cancer. So this was yet another kind of punch that he had to take, and he was actually very connected. At least that's what we found out, that he was very connected to Pearl, her name was. So that was a big loss for him. And then during the military, he wanted to actually go to Korea instead of Vietnam. And he never felt the purpose, and this is going to be an important point. He never really felt that he had found his purpose, and he actually left the military feeling like he knew himself even less and didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. After the military and not knowing which direction to go into, he started to go on a killing spree. And this was because he didn't feel accepted by anyone. He had lost one of the only persons that he felt very connected to. And also, as if you're watching this, you can see that his adoptive mother had this dark hair, and he was also mainly targeting women, not exclusively, but mainly women that had dark hair. And the first time he killed, and this is also going to be interesting when we look at his human design, was actually him using a knife. And this was the only time that he chose to use the knife as a weapon. Both of these women survived. So one of the victims was a definite victim, and the other one is not clear if they actually were a victim or not. But he at least stabbed one woman, if not two women, basically. And once he realized that that didn't work out, like he wasn't successful in actually killing them, he decided to then start using a gun instead.
Yeah, that seems more efficient, huh? Fun fact, he actually had quite the plethora of guns in his collection, but he asked a friend if he could buy him a gun on my birthday in like 1974, 1975. And I'm pretty sure it was 1975 because that's the year he started killing. So it was June 12th, 1975. He's like, "Hey bro, can you buy me a gun?" And his friend bought him a gun, even though he had quite the plethora of guns already. So happy my birthday can go down in history like that, I guess.
Oh my God. Yeah, he had also a very interesting sense of timing because, his first killing was on Christmas Eve, or he tried to kill them.
Attempted murders.
Yes, so that was on Christmas Eve, and then again, this is going to be interesting when you look at the human design because he kept trying but also failing a lot, as in for him success was obviously people taking their last breath, but he was often unsuccessful in doing so. So that again just added to the vicious circle of not feeling good enough,
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to add in a little personal touch before we get on with the rest of the murders, or attempted murders rather, because he was not super successful often. And there were a lot of people who were able to identify him, honestly, which is pretty great because I'm pretty sure that's how he ended up in jail so quickly. So my mom grew up in the Bronx, and she lived in Pelham, or not Pelham. She lived in like let me go back. My grandfather was a garbage man, so they lived in like subsidized city housing. And it was maybe like 3 miles, which is like 4.5-ish kilometers away from where the first killing was in Pelham and Co-op City, which is kind of crazy. And I'm pretty sure my mom moved out at 18, and these murders started happening when she was 19. So that same year, she had hair like down to her butt, like long, beautiful brown hair down to her butt. And she ended up cutting her hair that year because of the son of Sam, as I'm sure did many in the areas that were being affected throughout New York, which I think is really interesting because I can't imagine being in a place with, serial killers, I'm sure very much still exist, but I've never lived in a place with an active serial killer who has a very specific target, right? To go to the extent of cutting your hair to not look like that target, potentially even dyeing your hair blonde, right? Because he was very much after people who had like brown hair longer. Could you imagine going to that extent to change your appearance so much that you don't appeal to a potential serial killer that you live maybe 3 miles, 4.5 kilometers away from. That's nuts. So anyway, that was the year she cut her hair, and she's never had long hair since. That was a very weird, yeah, no, she's literally, her hair has been like a pixie cut or like a bob length her entire life. And that was what, 50 years? That's nuts. Literally, she cut her hair because of the Son of Sam. I know it's a weird like correlation to this story, but just proximity wise, she like went to the same areas that he was, I guess, murdering in. I don't have a better word to describe that.
Have you ever asked her if she would like to grow it back, or if she understands why she's not growing it back? Because it seems to have had a bigger impact on her.
It did,
even
right?
Subconsciously, to just continue not growing it out.
Yeah, I don't know. I think also just with age, it got easier to like manage a little bit shorter. And then the 80s, like perms were in, so that was super cute. And I think she just like kept with it. But yeah, it's crazy how what seemingly is, I don't know, not seemingly, is an external factor can impact one's life so much in that way. But yeah, thankfully my mom is very much alive and didn't get attacked by the Son of Sam. But I feel like the threat and the potential those 2 summers was pretty real throughout New York, especially because the majority of the people that he targeted were between the ages of like 15 and 25. And she met that demographic 100%. And so did her friends, actually. So really happy they're all still with us.
Yeah, he kept saying, I mean, the interview that I read was from Scott Bonn, PhD. He wrote a book on Why We Love Serial Killers, The Curious Appeal of the World's Savage Murderers. And he was also saying that especially the women from the Bronx were very appealing to him. He felt like those were the prettiest women out there. And when I was looking at the victims, which I'm showing if you're watching on YouTube, the names and also their faces are actually quite Italian. And you do have Italian roots, so it can also stem from that. I mean, I found that very interesting.
Yeah, my mom was literally like his perfect subject. Scary, man.
Yeah, I agree.
So all of that to say is we're going to head into his human design chart, because this is where the nitty gritty, really cool shit happens.
Absolutely. And before we actually dive into one chart, we like to place a little disclaimer here, because we don't have the exact birth time. So we kind of tested it out a little bit, and we found that in the early morning hours, just at around 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, he would be a 5-2 profile. And he would have the 4816 channel defined. If you take a look at the time that is mostly used by astrologers, it's 1652 on the 1st of June 1953. So if you want to check it out yourself, and if you're just listening, then you can type that birth time into mybodygraph.com or Maya Mechanics. And he was born in Brooklyn, New York, in the United States of America, just to make it very precise. And the other time that we also checked, so you can see here if you're watching, and if not, the channel 4816 shifted to 5720. So this is a shift from one channel to another. However, the quadruple split, which he is still there. And that is still a very important point, and it still gives the same kind of definition in the chart. So we're going to get to that. Celestina is all excited if you watch her.
In case you guys didn't know, like, I don't really write notes for these episodes. Maybe that comes through. Miko's our resident quad left here. So she is all about the notes and whatnot, and I'm just a fly by the seat of my pants kind of person. However, today I do have notes, and you best believe there are multiple exclamation marks like after quadruple split, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, because I feel like that, holy shit, that is impactful to this story.
I agree. So here in the 1652 time, we have the quadruple left split still, but we have a shift in profile once again. So he becomes a 6-2 profile, and then at 2216 approximately, a different time frame, he becomes a 6-3 profile. So that's the more or less major shifts, and we decided to stick to the 1652 time just because it seems to be the one that is mostly used. And yeah, we're going to base our assumptions on that. So if you would like to get started with what you found, Celestina.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so obviously he's a 6'2", right? So Miko kind of alluded to this earlier of like when he was killing, he was, I'm pretty sure, in his early 20s. I'm trying to think now.
24.
Math. Yeah, he was 24, right? So he was very much in his 3 line as a 6 line.
23 even.
Yeah. So he was learning by doing, and he was not killing well, seemingly. Right? Like his end goal was to kill the person, and he was not doing that for a couple of his victims. So just again, in his 3 line, he was very much learning by doing and not really succeeding to the point that he wanted to succeed. And that's not to make light of these murders, right? Like I think that that's also really important, right? That I'm saying this, I think, with a little bit of lightness, and yeah, like they didn't die, but also I think this is also reflective of where he was at in his life at this point, and that's not to take away from the actions that he took and the people's lives who were lost. So that was also, just let me add that in. But yeah, so I feel like that's a very high overview of the profile piece of it. But I feel like the points that are most poignant, if you will, is if you look at his chart, he is a quadruple split. And my understanding of that, Miko, you're more than welcome to elaborate because I'm sure you know exponentially more than I do about this. However, it kind of feels like you are multiple people when you have splits in your chart. And the quadruple split is literally the most splits in a chart you can have. So for him, his head and his ajna are connected, right? So that's one piece of his body that is talking. Amazing. The other piece of his body that's talking are his spleen and his throat. So at least he can emote from what he's feeling in the moment. So good for you, buddy boy. And he also has the connection from his heart to his G center, and then finally from his sacral center to his root. So there's a lot happening there, and there's also basically 4 humans inside of him struggling to be heard at all times. And it's really interesting because this leads into his name, which I'll allude. This is just a little allude to that, but we'll talk about more of how the Son of Sam came to be. What are your thoughts on this quad split? Because it's so intense.
Yeah, a quad split. Being a quad split is quite complex, and he has one wide split, so that would be from the throat to the ajna. And a wide split basically means that you have more than one gate that is missing to complete the split. So there are quite a few bridging gates that are just gates which he would search for a lot of times in his not self to feel more complete. And that would be gate 10, gate 34, gate 14, gate 7, gate 13, gate 54, gate 21, and gate 27. So these are kind of the energies that he's searching for. And this is also where you will most often find quite a bit of challenges in yourself if you're not aware of it. And if you're kind of lost in the shadow aspects of yourself. So a quadruple split is someone that actually needs to move through a lot of auras and he is a 6-2 profile. So it could have been that he was hermiting a lot, like he was retracting a lot, he was being by himself a lot, and he wasn't receiving a call to come out for his talents, or he was ignoring them. That could also be an option. So he was becoming more and more of a hermit, more and more of a loner. Also, this is one thing that he describes a lot in the interview that I read, where he feels very lonely in his life. And as a quadruple split, he actually should be going out and moving through auras. So I know someone who is a quadruple split, and one thing they do is that they take their bicycle and they drive to work every day and back from work every day with their bicycle. So this helps them to move through different people's auras without actually being attached to one specific person. So a quadruple split often has challenges being in a fixed relationship, being in a one-person relationship. They have a tendency to be polyamorous or to just be open in their relationship. So they really need to connect with multiple people. It doesn't have to be this way, that you are not able to be in a monogamous relationship, but you have a tendency to feel the desire to be with more people. This can be in a romantic setting, but it can also be friends-wise. So it's just about connecting with different people and their energies. So this can also cause some challenges if you're a quadruple split, because it takes longer for you to digest information. It takes longer for you to understand your inner intuition. So because it has to go through 4 different parts, as Celestina has already described. Your body is talking to you in 4 different ways, and for the information to go all the way through from head to toe, basically, it takes quite some time.
I wonder if that led into, we can tie this back into him getting these callings. So he didn't start his killing spree until he moved to a new apartment, and within that apartment he didn't like the neighbor like above him or beside him or whatever, because the neighbor had a dog. He didn't love the dog. The dog's name was Sam, and that's where his name came from, right? He said that he was getting these I guess insights from Sam, or Sam was talking to him and saying, you need to kill, you must kill. And he was scapegoating his murdering sprees on his neighbor's dog. That's where the son of Sam came from, and he was really trying to make a name of himself with this. And they kept calling him David Berkowitz. Well, when they figured it out, he was really trying to make a name, and they weren't having it, nonetheless. I think it's really interesting that he was getting these, if you will, insights from a dog, but using that as kind of this, I guess, veil to hide behind, or reasoning to commit these murders. But I wonder how much that has to do with the quad split, and perhaps, I don't know, just not being all mentally there, potentially, from maybe previous concussions or just previous like life happenings that have occurred, leading into some of that, in addition to the quad split aspect of his chart.
Yeah, I can see how this may tie into a few things. Also, on top of that, he started to be very much interested in Satanism. So this is also a very interesting thing, in my opinion, because he was looking at something to attach himself to, and this is also something that shows up in his chart, where he kind of chooses to be part of a very exclusive group, and there aren't that many Satanists out there. So he chooses to be part of this relatively exclusive group. Later on in life, like now these days, he's actually claiming to be a Christian, or he may be a Christian, I don't know, but that's what he defines himself as. And he also says that he found this faith, so he really feels very connected to it and like a changed man, but still he would say that he deserves to stay in prison. So on one hand, he shifted into a light aspect, potentially, and on another, he spent a lot of his time in the dark during these killing sprees. So I found that also interesting, especially when you're starting to look at the details in his chart later. So one additional thing before we step into the centers is that when you look at the chart and you only look at the design side, you will see that there are two types of definitions here. So he has the head and the ajna defined, and he has the self and the ego defined. So these are the two, or the four centers and the two separate islands, I would say, that are unconscious to him. And then when you look at the personality only, you will see that he's actually defining consciously as a reflector. So he doesn't have any centers defined. And this is something that I find always very interesting to do this experiment, or this just taking these two charts apart, because that shows that he doesn't have a conscious access to his inner authority, which is the sacral.
Holy shit.
Because in both, it is undefined.
I can't imagine being that defined together and then feeling so disconnected in design and personality. This comes from a person who presents as a reflector in both in design and personality. And I'm not very defined in my chart. I literally only have my throat and my heart defined. So I can, wow. He must have felt like 4 or 5 different people. Holy shit.
Yeah, it's a very, very complex design. And I think because of his childhood, it just became more and more difficult for him. So because of having these wrong thought processes implanted into him, that he first killed his mother, then he was adopted, he found out when he was 5, then his adoptive mother dies of breast cancer, and so he has so many things that keep happening over and over again. Also the head injuries, and additionally not understanding who you truly are. So if you're not raised with a lot of love in a situation like that and a lot of understanding from your parents, it can be very difficult.
Is it weird that I want to give this guy a hug? I feel so bad.
I understand your sentiment totally. And this is going to gain a lot of criticism probably.
Probably. Come at me, guys. Cancel me.
But I personally also believe, so my concept that I created, the opportunity concept that I created, that helps people uncover their true self and release their full potential, is all about believing that every single one of us has this unconditional love residing within us. So some call it the soul. I personally just call it like a tiny little speck of source. You can call it God or Allah or however you like. But it's basically every single one of us has this inside of us. And the thing is that throughout life, our layers that are covering this soul aspect, which are 4 layers, the physical body layer, the energy layer, the mind and emotions, and the spiritual aspects in life. So you can collect clutter and blockages within each of these layers throughout your life. And I personally believe that it's a mix with people that are going out there and harming other individuals, that they're so blocked in their layers that they're not able to connect with this well of love anymore inside of them. So they do have it, but it can be so deeply buried in them that they don't have any kind of access to it.
Yeah. Mm. David Berkowitz, man, he did some fucked up shit, but I think this brings new insights into it though, right? I think this gives us a like looking at someone's human design in this way, especially a serial killer, I think just gives us more insights into the wow, you're working with something really heavy, and if you didn't have the right environment to be brought up in, yeah, it makes sense that you went the way you did. You know, it could have been really good, and you could have used your superpowers for good, but you were not in the right place at the right time to really harness those superpowers, and that sucks.
Yes, totally
Sorry,
agree
buddy.
with that.
It sucks. Okay, wow. Dude, I'm really happy that you split those two charts. That gave me such insights because on the daily, guys, I feel like a reflector. Like, yeah, I'm a manifester, but on the daily, I feel like a reflector. So I can only imagine how, not powerless, but like how much he didn't feel like he was making an impact in his world and how much he didn't feel like he was being seen in his world. That's really intense. To go from feeling like you have all of the energy to feeling like you have none of it has got to be wild. The other really important note that I also exclamation marked like 4 times on my notes was his wide open emotional solar plexus guide. Wide the fuck open. It is, I mean, okay, there's a couple of gates pointing towards it, so it's not like super, super wide like we were talking about on 2 episodes ago. Nonetheless, it has been stated that while he was on a killing spree, he was like, why is this girl screaming? He couldn't understand the emotions that she was experiencing whilst he was doing so. And I listened to a podcast about this. Actually, I'm going to shout you guys out. Morbid, Elena and Ash, you guys are awesome. But it was actually in their podcast that they noted this, that he didn't understand why his victims were expressing emotionally whilst he was attempting to or whilst he was murdering them. And that's really interesting to me because we've talked about it on the Centers episode that people can develop and understand and learn about the centers that they have that they don't have defined, right? Especially emotionally. That can be something that takes time to understand, and I believe Miko phrased it as it could feel like someone is on the spectrum, right? If they don't have the emotional center defined, because it may be challenging for them to read other people's emotions. But it's really interesting to me that everything else for him is pretty well defined and his emotional center is wide open. And he was really, even as a 20-year-old, was not understanding what other people were feeling as he was inflicting pain upon them.
Yeah. To me as well, the emotional solar plexus, of course, immediately stood out. It is wide open in the sense it doesn't have any gates coming out of it, and I do believe that this can also be a sign for sociopathy or psychopathy. It doesn't mean that if it is like this in your chart that you are a sociopath or psychopath. And even if, it still doesn't mean that you're going to go out killing people. It's just all totally different things. But it is still very interesting to take a look at that. He was also diagnosed with ADHD when he was a child, so hyperactive. This could also be the connection from the root to the sacral. Like, he has 3 motor centers. That's a lot of energy for a chart and for a child and even an adult. But the connection to emotions can be very challenging for someone that is open in their emotional solar plexus. So one of the main gates that I would like to focus on is gate 32, and this is defined by his Neptune. So I'm going to, for everyone that's watching, you can see gate 32 coming out of the spleen here. And the reason why I'm focusing on this is because when he was born, his Neptune was in retrograde. And a planet being in retrograde can mean that this is an aspect that you are maybe hiding from the world, maybe turning inwards. And Neptune in itself is already a planet that veils aspects of yourself. So these are things that are not very clear to you. And for him, that meant that he was feeling very disjointed. And in his reactive shadow, he had no sense of rhythm and purpose. So here again, we can see this aspect that was earlier mentioned in the interview, that it also reflects in your chart. So you can always check the shadows, the light aspects, and the mastery of these gates in your chart if you combine human design and gene keys. And you will be able to work on it by understanding these aspects, your shadow aspects and your light aspects, but also understanding the other side. So understanding the other side of the channel. So if it's a hanging gate, you're often going to try to feel more complete by connecting with the other side of the channel. And this can be another person, this can be a planetary transition. And you will also find answers on the other side of the mandala. So if you look at the mandala, you will see the exact opposite side. So for example, in this case, the earth and the sun are always on opposite sides. So gate 16, the other side is gate 9 in Son of Sam's case. And you can see you can gain a lot of insights by understanding that other side of the mandala as well. So in his case, Neptune was also causing a lot of anger that there is nothing to support him in except himself. So he really felt by himself. He felt like there was no one else for him to feel supported. And his repressed shadow, so there's always a repressed and a reactive shadow, and his repressed shadow would show as a tendency to isolate themselves in a tight little community. So this is what I was saying regarding the Satanism, that this is a little tiny community, but it's still a shadow aspect. You wouldn't really go out there and find a large community or find friends, find people to connect with. It's more of a shadow expression of just staying to yourself. And the gate that I would like to focus on regarding the emotional solar plexus is gate 41. So in this chart, you will see that gate 41 is in his north node and is in his moon. And in this aspect, gate 41 is so much about longing to fulfill your fantasies. And in his childhood already, he was talking a lot about having fantasies of killing others, also killing his father, his birth father, his also the person that his biological mother had an affair with. So there were all these fantasies coming up in his mind, and he had a hunger for a better future. And in the shadow aspect, it can show up as hyperactive, being hyperactive and trying to manifest your dreams. So again, you can see the shadow aspects are really expressing themselves in his chart over and over and over again.
I think that kind of shows you how important it is as a parent to be supportive of your child and really, and their design, really, right? So I wish my parents had known my design as a kid, because I think that could have impacted things differently. I feel like I'm a pretty cool adult and they're pretty cool parents, but I think in this instance, right, if David was in a more loving home environment where he was truly supported and was allowed to kind of work through some of these challenges, I think his life would have been different. So it's really interesting to kind of hone in on this and see the potential of what could have been versus what was, because he stayed in the shadow.
Yes, and especially in this case with going back to gate 41, it's really, the moon is about the conscious personality moon is really about what you need to feel emotionally secure. And because he was living in the shadows, he really wanted to express his fantasies. So he wanted to go out there and live the fantasies. But that's not what it's about. yes, you can have amazing fantasies, and you could be a really, really great author if you have this and you express your fantasies through fiction or through crime novels or whatever it may be. It's not about going out there and actually fulfilling these fantasies per se, unless you're going into it with love and open-heartedness. It's not about, it's really not about expressing and doing these fantasies. It is more about sharing your inner thoughts with others and releasing the desire to fulfill your fantasies, not holding on to them and feeling that I have to do it.
So he could have benefited from therapy, is what I'm hearing.
Oh yeah, he could have benefited from quite a few things. Mindfulness, for example, or not attaching yourself to actually fulfilling all of these fantasies. It's really about accepting them and understanding, yes, I have them, but not going out there, and especially when it's such dark fantasies that harm other people, to actually go out there and do it.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that covers at least all of the notes that I have. The only thing that I have that we haven't talked about is his Incarnation Cross, which I think is really interesting as well.
I agree.
Do we have the same notes today? We're so on point.
Well, no. I mean, I agree on the Incarnation Cross.
Yeah. No, but that's what I mean. All of our notes have aligned so well today.
Yeah, it is.
Preparation, man. All right. You probably know more about this Incarnation Cross than I do. I just did a quick little googly Google about it. So I'm going to let you take the lead.
The Incarnation Cross is a left angle cross of identification, which I already find super fascinating just because of the name itself.
Yeah.
Just imagine you have all of these struggles of identifying who you are just thrown at you from birth. And then this is your Incarnation Cross. So the shadow that he was expressing, so the Incarnation Cross is, in his case, in the personality Sun, it's 16. In personality Earth, it's 9. In design Earth, it's 64. And design Sun is 63. So he has 2 of these gates in an unconscious head center. And that creates a lot of questions of what or what if in gate 63. And in gate 64, it is about how. So just take a moment to think about this. How and what if in this situation?
Ooh, I got the chills in like not a good way. Ooh.
Yeah. And this is a constant over and over and over and over thought process in his mind if he's living in his shadow. And I think we've covered that he was living quite a bit in his shadow at this point. So it was really important for him to release the need to identify with doubt, unbiased inquiry, and self-discovery. So he really should have stepped into self-discovery more, and instead of and deciphering which questions are actually for him to answer. That is a very important thing, because you can have all these questions of what if and how. It's just about not attaching yourself to them and releasing them and identifying which ones are actually here for you to be answered.
Dude, especially as a generator, right? Knowing what to respond to. There's probably lack of clarity there for him as well.
And with this 5720, I mean, if he really did have this channel, then this is really about responding in the now, following your intuitive insights in the now. But if you have no idea how your intuition is speaking to you and what it is saying, then this can be very, very dangerous. So I can totally also see why he was attacking people just randomly and not really having a specific person that he targeted, but instead just going out and finding people so that his sacral would respond to it and then acting in the now. And gate 64 is also creating these additional dizzying thoughts and just trying to express your fantasies. what he should have done is, instead of following these suffering and dizzying thoughts, is just to channel his fantasies into a creative form. Okay, some may argue that he was being very creative, but to just express it in a healthy way without harming anyone and in a creative way. This is how you can channel your fantasies into something that is not going to be so destructive to other people.
So like watercolor maybe would have been a more appropriate medium.
I agree. For example. Yeah, and what I also find fascinating, I mean, the other channel that I can see here in this chart, which is also half unconscious, half conscious, is again this completion, the 42-53. So he starts something and he brings it to completion. And having this as a natural design and a natural imprint, and then failing at completing what you set out to do, is again just a setback. It's again showing him that you're not good enough, you're not doing it right. You're even with gate 16 and gate 16 is all about expressing your talents and fine-tuning your talents. So if he did have the other side of the gate, even if he didn't, it's something that is ingrained into him, that he wants to perfect what he's doing. And all of this is just adding fire to the flames, fuel to the flames.
This was extremely insightful. Man, I think it just gives so much more perspective when you're looking at someone's chart, as accurate as it can be, to just garner, I guess, a deeper perspective. Wow. And literally everything you've said, I've just been like, yep, that checks.
Yeah, and also he has the channel of shock. So here, this is my channel. So here you can see the absolute worst way that it can be expressed in shocking other people into transformation. There are several ways that you can interpret that statement right now. But to me, it's really fascinating to look at all of this. And he also has the 31, and the 31 is in his, so this is in his South Node, personality South Node. So it's going to be one of the most important environmental aspects up to the age of approximately 40, until the Uranus opposition approximately. And this is often there in people that are tyrants or rulers that are really, really horrible, because this is about leadership. And when you're grabbing this leadership without being invited into being a leader, this can be very catastrophic. So, I mean, as always, this is only the tiniest little tip of the iceberg. And there are ways to help individuals like that if they are willing to have the help. And human design just helps us a lot in helping others. Understanding, I mean, we don't have to have a therapy session with him for hours and hours and hours. We can look at his chart and identify these challenges quite quickly.
I think if this existed when he was, I guess before he was on his rampages, that would have been extremely insightful. But like you said, it's also if someone wants it, right? Because it's if someone wants to do the self-development, if someone wants to do therapy, which is also self-development, if someone wants to learn their chart, it all really stems back to the desire to do so, the desire to change, the desire to grow, and I think the desire for more insights into yourself. Because without that, without the want, without the need, yeah, you can give it to them, but if you lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink, you know? I always like to say, if you lead a Luna to water, it's my dog, you can't make her drink. Homegirl's the most dehydrated dog on the planet.
Really? Yeah, absolutely. It always comes down to, are you ready to prioritize yourself and to make the changes that are necessary? And this is something that projectors especially learn very fast that they need to wait for someone to invite them to before giving some recommendations. And yeah, it's the same. You can't just force people into change.
Dude, totally. Well, guys, hopefully you enjoy true crime as much as Miko and I do, and hopefully this episode was as insightful and aha-y as it was for us doing the research and discovering this and then like learning about his history, because damn, it was cool to be able to see all of that come together.
Absolutely. And if you would like us to cover someone in particular, we are happy to do so. They don't have to be serial killers. We're also going to step into other celebrities that have achieved great things in this lifetime or in their lifetime. So it's really about just giving you ways to understand your own chart better, to understand how shadows express themselves, to understand how your potential expresses itself, and just to see charts come together, because you can see just by doing this tiny little reading on his chart, which is really just a little bit of what we can see in it, but you can see how it's important to take it all as a bundle. You can't just separate things and give a 100% answer. You have to really look at the whole dynamics.
Most definitely. And I think that also reaffirms that life happens and life can impact you as well, right? It's not just the design and personality that you were born with. It's so multifactorial, and it's not just the card you're dealt, it's how you play with that deck.
Yes. Well, on that high note...
Wait, can we add that to Chelisms? Because I feel like you have so many good
Yes.
Mikoisms. I'm going to add that to a Chelism.
I would like that too. Yes. We're going to bring out a book at the end of this.
Hell yeah.
So thank you very much for listening or watching. It was a pleasure being here with you again. Thank you for your time as well, Celestina.
Of course, right back at you. Ciao, guys. Next week.
Bye.